A young girl named Karen stands by a gate, admiring a bush of white flowers. She tells her older brother they are pretty, and he agrees. He reaches down, his hand gently plucking one of the blossoms from its stem. He gently places the flower in Karen's blonde hair, telling her it fits perfectly. She looks up at him, a blush on her cheeks, and thanks her eye. As a single petal drifts down from another flower, Karen's expression shifts to one of concern. Her brother notices immediately and asks her what is wrong. She wonders aloud if picking the flower might have been painful for it. Her brother, realizing he inadvertently upset her, quickly reassures her that it isn't her fault. He reflects internally that this is a good sign. Karen is on track to grow into a kind person. The boy pulls his sister into a warm embrace, surrounded by the ethereal images of a stern, dark-haired man, a blue-haired maid, and a girl with animal ears. He makes a silent vow to change the future laid out in his sister's scenario. It is revealed that he has been reincarnated into the world of a game as the older brother of the villainess, a character fated to die. Now, possessing immense power, he is determined to nurture his little sister and rewrite her destiny. The scene shatters. A young man with dark hair jolts awake, his face contorted as if waking from a powerful dream. He rubs his eyes, recognizing the fleeting images as visions from a past life. He recalls a painful memory of his then-girlfriend demanding to know who was more important, his sister or her, claiming it was a request from his parents. Seeing through the lie, he had told her they should break up. He also remembers his loving family, but a note on a whiteboard reveals his parents' demanding work schedules, often keeping them away from home until late at night. Due to their absence, he had to stand in for them, which meant taking constant care of his sickly younger sister. He remembers tending to her while she was feverish in bed and trying to coax her to eat her carrots at the dinner table. This had always been his reality. He recalls the simple, comforting act of holding her small hand in his. The memory flows into the present moment. He arrives home, carrying a bag of groceries, and announces he'll start making dinner. From the couch, his sister coughs weakly. She asks for a drink but then amends her request, asking for his special blend of hot tea. He readily agrees. He finds his sister on the couch, engrossed in the combat portion of a familiar game. She announces that she's currently playing through Orikakuin's route. He pleads with her, telling her not to project her own pain onto everything she does. Reaching out, he touches her forehead and realizes she has a fever. He tells her it's enough with the games and that she should go back to her room and sleep, but she protests, declaring that she's already decided to see the character's route through to the end by today. He sighs, seeing no other choice. As a compromise, he takes the controller to play in her stead while she lies down on the couch to watch. She calls this a good compromise. While he plays, his sister asks if he prefers characters like the villainess, Caroline. He replies that he just sees a pitiful character that no one ever loved. On screen, Caroline laments her defeat before dying. His sister notes her death with a quiet. His sister's voice cuts through the game's audio. She quietly speculates that she will probably leave mid-game in his life as well. He turns, shocked, telling her not to say such things. He tries to brush off her morbid words with a joke, declaring that in the future, when she brings a boyfriend home, he'll be the one to vet him. She weakly protests that such a duty belongs to a father. But the light-hearted moment fades into a grim reality. At a hospital, his sister, Nanami, lies in bed, attached to an oxygen mask and in four. She apologizes for causing him problems her whole life and thanks him. Overcome with emotion, he clutches her hand, crying her name and insisting she was never a bother. Her words were her last. He sits hunched in a chair by her hospital bed, her body now still and covered by a white sheet. That was how his sister's life came to an end. The silence of the hospital room is broken by the sharp, sudden ringing of the phone. The call delivered more tragedy. A voice on the other end informed him that his parents had been in a car accident. The police theorized they had been driving recklessly, desperate to make it to their daughter's side in her final moments. And so, he was left alone, standing in the rain at their graves. He had stopped forming meaningful relationships with anyone. After the sudden death of his sister and parents, a crippling fear of losing someone close again took hold, leading him to a life of quiet isolation, punctuated only by the tapping of his keyboard. His solitary work was interrupted when a colleague grabbed him from behind, insisting he join them for a company drinking session. He tried to refuse, explaining he was busy, but his coworker was adamant, warning that management would be upset if he didn't come. There, at the restaurant, one colleague, Anza-san, proudly showed off a picture of her new baby. The conversation then turned to him, as another coworker asked Sato if he was married or had a girlfriend. He quietly admitted that his last girlfriend was back in university. She then tried to play matchmaker, suggesting a young woman at their table. Anza-san mentioned that the girl had found him attractive during lunch and proposed that he go on a simple date with her just to see if they were compatible. The other woman blushed, clearly flustered by the sudden attention. He understood what the gathering was truly about. Politely, he declined, explaining that he wasn't looking for romance at the moment. The woman apologized for putting pressure on him, and he replied that there were likely many people better suited for her than he was. The interaction left him feeling as though he were being pricked by a bed of needles. Walking home alone through the city at night, he reaffirmed his preference for solitude, deciding to simply buy something at a convenience store and head home. As he stepped into the crosswalk, the blinding headlights of a vehicle bore down on him. In that final moment, he realized his life was over. His last thought was one of relief. He was glad he had rejected the girl, sparing her the pain of his loss. His consciousness returned, but not to the world he knew. He had been reincarnated as a baby, He wondered if this was some divine punishment for making that woman cry. Looking around, he found himself in a large, opulent room as a voice announced that it was time for Lord Zex to have his milk. He was startled as a maid began feeding him from a bottle. The Western-style attire and interior design were confusing, yet the maid spoke Japanese. This must still be Japan, he reasoned, feeling as though he'd drawn the short stick in this new life. Lying in the crib, he processed his new reality. He had two caretakers looking after him, and he understood that neither of them was his mother. The maid's voice cut through his thoughts, telling the dense child to hurry up and finish the bottle. He overheard the maid's whispers, calling him a pitiful, unsettling child who never cried or laughed. They noted his white hair, speculating it meant he was colorless. He couldn't see, but he processed their words, wondering about the meaning of their description. He realized with a jolt that beyond being fed, bathed, and having his diapers changed, he was being completely neglected. He knew this was dangerous. On the inside, he was a 27-year-old adult, and he recalled learning about an experiment from the Middle Ages where babies left without affection all died before their first year. This realization solidified his resolve. Recalling the heartbreak of his past life, he decided it was better not to get deeply involved with anyone. He refused to experience that kind of loss a second time. It was better to form no relationships from start. That resolve was immediately tested. Now a toddler, he watched as a maid presented him with a newborn baby. She called the infant beautiful and declared that this was his sister. The word struck him like a physical blow. He had already decided he no longer wished for a sister. His shock deepened as a man and a woman entered the room. The woman, his mother, cooed that Zex had grown so much. The stern-faced man, his father, simply told the maid she had done enough. As they fawned over his new sister, calling her cute, the truth crashed down on him. These were his parents. The peaceful moment shattered as the baby in the crib let out a piercing wail. To Zex, the sound was deafeningly loud. His parents, however, were merely annoyed. His mother sighed that Caroline was crying again, calling her a noisy child. His father suggested they leave for tea time, and she readily agreed. With that, they turned and left, the sound of the door closing echoing through the room. Zex stood frozen in disbelief. He snapped out of his stupor, rushing to the door and pounding on it with his tiny fists. He couldn't believe it. They were going to leave a baby alone in this state. He peeked from behind a wall, listening as two servants discussed their duties. They confirmed that both Lord Zex and Lady Caroline have been fed and don't need their diapers changed yet. Concluding this, they decide to simply leave the children alone. The toddler's mind seethes with silent rage, screaming at them to do their jobs. His frustration mounts in the nursery. As his sister wails from her crib, he tries to dismiss it, thinking to himself that it's not his problem. The room is littered with discarded building blocks. He examines the provided entertainment with disdain. He picks up a picture book, annoyed to find the words are written in Japanese, a relic of his past life. He then glances at the building blocks, wondering what kind of strange fixation this is for a man with a 28-year-old mind. His search for a suitable distraction ends with a sigh. He is left with nothing more than a simple baby rattle. He approaches the crib and tentatively offers the rattle to Caroline. Her large, teary eyes stare up at him, her crying momentarily subdued. Her lack of reaction shatters his patience. With a sharp motion, he throws the rattle directly at her head, deciding it's no longer his problem and she can just keep crying by herself. The impact elicits a fresh, loud wail from the baby. He turns away, trying to ignore the noise and focus on his book, repeating that it's not his problem. But a glance at the clock on the dresser sparks a realization. It's long past the time for Caroline's milk. The realization prompts him to act. He toddles to the door and knocks repeatedly. From the other side, he hears the staff remarking that Lord Zex is just playing by knocking. He understands with a sinking feeling that they are deliberately ignoring him. His knocking ignored, he spots a bell pull cord used to summon servants. Desperate, he takes a running leap, straining with all his might to reach it. But his small body falls short, and he crashes to the floor with a cry. Suddenly, the door swings open, revealing the dark-haired maid. Scrambling to his feet, Zex points urgently at his sister, shouting for milk. The maid, looking slightly taken aback, moves to the crib and lifts the crying Caroline. Zex watches them, his arms crossed in deep frustration. He watches as the maid, having finished feeding his sister, announces her departure. For a moment, Caroline is content, quietly drinking from her bottle. His relief is short-lived. A sudden, dreadful realization strikes him with alarming clarity: the diapers. With the task reluctantly completed, he looks over at Caroline in her crib. Now with a full belly and a clean diaper, she coos happily. He turns away sharply, forcing a scowl. He insists to himself that this is a one-time occurrence, rationalizing that he only helped because her crying was annoying him. But the neglect persists. With no maid in sight, he finds himself once again tending to his sleeping sister. He tries reading a lullaby from a book, questioning the strange lyrics, before resigning himself to changing her diaper yet again. He continues reading from the picture book, describing the sounds of a radish and a carrot. To his surprise, Caroline kicks her feet in delight, seemingly captivated by the story. Time passes. Caroline is now a toddler, and as they play with blocks, she manages to sit up straight all by herself. He praises her achievement, calling her amazing. Beaming with pride, she picks up a single block and offers it to him. He accepts the small gift with a gentle, genuine smile, thanking her. Caroline's own smile widens in shared happiness. The tender moment is shattered by the maid's sudden appearance. She erupts, declaring that the room is only for children's things, not for him. Then, she collapses into a bizarre tantrum, wailing that she's bored and that taking care of him is her only entertainment. The two children can only stare, stunned into silence. He quickly apologizes to his sister, who seems to have been startled by the maid's outburst. Later, lying in his bed, he curses his situation. The maid had continued her tantrum until she was satisfied. A wave of heat washes over him, and he realizes with dread that he has a fever, likely the flu or something contagious. His primary concern is for Caroline, sleeping in her crib nearby. He must not pass it on to her. He gets up and knocks on a door, seeking help. The dark-haired maid and the stern, black-haired man answer. Zex explains that he has a fever and will pass it to Caroline if they remain in the same room. The man, however, states that he cannot permit a room change without the Lord's permission, though he will request a doctor. Frustrated by the bureaucracy, he drops the pretense of being a child and demands they at least move his bed as far away from Caroline as possible. The man seems taken aback but agrees. As the man goes to tend to Caroline, the maid whispers to him, noting how Zex spoke exactly like an adult despite being only 1 year old. She finds it disturbing, suggesting he might be possessed or cursed. Zex, left alone, can only watch. Tucked into his bed, which has now been moved, he reflects on his mistake. He realizes it might have been a bad idea to stop acting like a child. But the fever intensifies, his head and entire body aching. He vaguely recalls that the last time he had a fever this bad was when he was a child, in his previous life. The memory becomes clearer. Whenever he had a fever back then, his sister, Nanami, was always by his side. Lost in the delirium, he hears a desperate crying in the darkness. He calls out his sister's name, Nanami, wondering who is weeping so sorrowfully. He reaches out in his feverish dream, his past self promising his little sister that her big brother will stay right by her side, pleading for her to stop crying. The dream fades as he stirs in bed, his fever-addled mind registering a faint, distant cry. He remembers they moved him to this room, concerned his illness might be contagious, and wanting to keep him away from Caroline. The sound grows louder, and he realizes it's her. Across the room, Caroline is standing in her crib, tears streaming down her face as she calls out desperately, "Aniray, Aniray." His eyes widen in disbelief, the sound cutting through the haze of his sickness. He realizes with a jolt that she is calling for him, her brother. It is the very first time Caroline has ever referred to him as such, and the unexpected affection strikes him deeply, especially since he felt he'd only cared for her out of necessity. Panic surges as he sees her trying to climb out of the crib. "No," he cries out, forcing his trembling body to move. He swings his legs over the side of the bed, but his strength fails him, and he collapses heavily onto the floor. She reaches him safely. He pulls her into a desperate embrace, whispering her name, flooded with relief that she is unharmed. The effort is too much, however, and his consciousness begins to fade as he slumps over. He lies still on the cold floor. Caroline looks down at him, her head tilted in confusion, and softly calls out to him again. After a moment of puzzled silence, she begins to gently pat his back, a simple, childlike attempt to offer comfort. With her brother unresponsive, she decides to stay close, snuggling up against his back, and quickly drifting off to sleep beside him on the floor. She slept soundly on the floor, curled up next to her brother. Sunlight streamed through a nearby window, illuminating the quiet room where the two children lay. He awoke with a start, his mind clearing. Touching his forehead, he was surprised to find his fever had completely vanished and his body felt healthy again. He wondered if he had lost consciousness, and a sudden panic seized him as he looked for Caroline, finding her sleeping peacefully beside him. He watched her stir, a soft sound escaping her lips. He greeted her gently, "Good morning, Caroline." He briefly considered if she had stayed by his side out of worry, but dismissed the thought, reminding himself she was only 8 months old. Her eyes fluttered open, and a bright, joyful smile spread across her face as she called out, "Aniray." Zex stared, his eyes wide with shock. He had resolved to never let anyone into his world again, but he couldn't deny what he had just heard. His hands clutched the fabric of his nightshirt. He knew then that he couldn't stop this bond from forming. She was his sister. Overcome with emotion, he pulled her into a tight embrace. He accepted his new reality, telling her, "That's right, Caroline. I'm your older brother, and you're my precious sister." Sometime later, the two stood in the family library, now older. Zex, dressed in his formal attire, scanned the shelves and asked his sister what she wanted to read for the day. Caroline hummed thoughtfully, looking at the vast collection of books. She excitedly pulled a large, ornate volume from a lower shelf. "And this," she exclaimed, presenting him with a book titled The Legend of the Holy Empire. Zex agreed, telling her to take a seat so he could read it to her. He began to read the story aloud. It told of a time when the Demon King had arrived at the final frontier. Just when all seemed lost, a voice cried out that they would not lose. The voice belonged to the hero, Xion, who stood beside the Saintess Kizara. As he read, Caroline looked up at him and called his name. He paused, asking what was wrong, but she simply replied that it was nothing. Internally, he sighed, thinking to himself that it was just a rather standard fairy tale for a picture book. He continued reading the names from the fairy tale, hero Xion, Saintess Kizara, which his sister repeated with a questioning tone. Those names triggered a horrifying realization. This world, it was the same as the game from his past life. He looked down at his sister, truly seeing her for the first time. Caroline Flammel Ui Serifornata. With her golden hair and scarlet eyes, she was unmistakably a character from that game. The shock sent his mind reeling back to his previous life, sitting hunched over in front of a glowing screen. He had just lost, seething at his defeat to a low-level opponent, feeling that another one of his options had failed. He agonized over his strategy, recalling a theory he had. If the capture target was close to Caroline, the number of survival routes would increase, offering the highest possibility of success. But he now understood that this, too, was wrong. His intense focus was broken by his sister, Nanami, appearing in the doorway wrapped in a blanket. She asked why he was still awake, and he mumbled that he was just thirsty. She looked towards the screen, wondering aloud if there was even a single route available. She noted how much time he'd been spending on the game and asked if he really liked it that much. She then told him to stop staring and go to sleep. He agreed quietly, wishing her good night as she left. Alone again, his thoughts returned to his true purpose. It was because of something Nanami had said. He was playing this game for a single, self-serving reason, to find a way to keep her by his side. But such a route, a path to survival for Caroline, had never existed in the game. And in his own life, that hope was also extinguished. Death came for his sister. The weight of that failure crashed back into his present. He choked, a wave of nausea washing over him. Not again. He couldn't bear it again. He stared at the innocent girl before him, the horrifying truth crystallizing in his mind. She, his sweet sister, is the one fated to die. She's the villainess. As he reeled from the revelation, Caroline, oblivious, leaned forward and gave him an affectionate kiss on the hand. She, in her innocent affection, leans in and kisses her brother's cheek, entirely unaware of the storm of despair raging within him. The weight of his knowledge becomes too much to bear, and tears stream down his face. Seeing his distress, Karen gently pats his head, trying to soothe him with a childish chant to make the pain go away. Her name echoes in his mind, a painful reminder of the future he must prevent. He furiously wipes his tears, refusing to accept such a tragic conclusion. A realization dawns. The main story of the game has not yet begun, leaving him with time and options. Karen's voice pulls him from his thoughts, asking if he's unhappy again. He quickly reassures her, promising to handle it. Her innocent trust shines through as she tells him she'll always be all right as long as he is with her. Overwhelmed, he pulls her into a tight embrace, making a silent, resolute promise to protect her. His resolve solidifies into an unbreakable oath, a declaration made against the grim, skeletal specter of destiny that looms over his sister. He will change Karen's fate. The young boy, Zex, sits with his arms crossed, contemplating his new reality. He has been reincarnated into a dating action RPG from his previous life, a game known as The Tale of the Brave Saint. In this world, he is merely a background character, the older brother of a girl named Caroline. Nearby, the very same Caroline, a small toddler, is happily occupied with her crayons and paper. He recalls the game's mechanics. The story was divided into 3 parts, with the first and most substantial part taking place at an academy. A player's choice of gender determined their role. A male player became the hero, while a female player became the saint. The second part was an adventure to reseal the Demon Lord, and the third focused on individual romantic pursuits, with various characters met during the academy stage. His thoughts turned specifically to Caroline. She only appeared in the game if one chose to play as the female protagonist, the saint. In that story, Caroline was the absolute worst kind of rival, selfish, arrogant, and consumed by jealousy from the very first encounter, a complete opposite to the pure and innocent saint. He remembers how her jealousy would intensify as more and more people, including the main love interests, were drawn to the saint. This envy would drive Caroline to harass the saint, an act that ironically only served to improve the saint's reputation among her peers. This dark path had a grim end. Unable to bear it any longer, Caroline would eventually join forces with the demons in an attempt to kill the saint. For this ultimate misdeed, she was fated to die. His grim recollection is shattered by a cheerful voice. His little sister, Karen, calls out to her knee and eye and proudly presents a piece of paper covered in energetic scribbles. He looks at her creation and praises it, calling it amazing and really good. Beaming with happiness, Karen closes her eyes, silently asking for a pat on the head. He obliges, gently resting his hand on her hair and thanking her. Her joy is infectious. She sits up straight amidst her papers and crayons, excitedly promising to draw more for her knee and eye. Seeing her pure, innocent happiness, a resolve forms in his mind. He must do something to avoid her fated death. He stands alone, gazing out a window, a plan beginning to form. He realizes that if he can simply avoid following the game's story, he can change the outcome. If he raises Karen properly, she won't grow up to be so arrogant. She won't become the saint's enemy, and she won't fall for the temptations of the demons. His expression hardens, his eyes filled with a new, steely determination. From the end of the hall, 2 maids watch him, whispering to each other in surprise at the young boy's incredibly serious demeanor. He hops up the grand staircase, his mind occupied with the concept of parental love. Unseen by him, 2 maids converse nearby, revealing the very reason for Caroline's future villainy. She receives no affection from her parents and is treated with cold indifference by the entire household staff. The weight of this knowledge is crushing. He realizes he must somehow make their parents love Karen, a task he deems impossible. He recalls seeing them only once when they first left her here and doubts she even remembers them. Determined, he approaches the butler, demanding to be informed the next time the master and mistress visit. The butler calmly agrees. 3 entire months pass. His frustration boils over as he stares out at the estate, aghast that his parents would abandon their children in a completely separate mansion. As he fumes, Karen tugs at his sleeve, urgently needing to use the restroom. He scoops her into his arms without a second thought, rushing through the halls. She clings to him, her face scrunched in discomfort as she whimpers that it will be soon. He reaches the door just in time. As he waits, a voice from the foyer echoes up the stairs, announcing the arrival of the master and mistress. His eyes widen in shock. He immediately dashes to the railing overlooking the entrance hall. Below, his father and mother stand, attended by the staff. "Father, mother," he calls out, his voice filled with desperate hope. His parents, however, do not even glance up. Instead, the butler turns, his voice sharp as he addresses Cyril by his name, Zex, and orders him to get down from there at once. He stares in disbelief, realizing they are completely ignoring him. His father simply instructs the butler to serve tea, and they turn to leave. Karen, now beside him, asks what's wrong. He quickly explains that their parents just didn't notice them, but the excuse feels hollow. Later, he sits with Karen, using a set of stuffed rabbits to explain a concept she has never truly known. He points to each one in turn, the rabbit dad, the rabbit mom, and their little rabbit child, and demonstrates how the mother rabbit gives her child a loving hug. He holds the plush family close, carefully explaining that a father and a mother are people who love you, who embrace you, and who always stay by your side to protect you. He sits on the floor with Karen, continuing his lesson on family. He asks if she understands, and she gives a cheerful confirmation. Her understanding is clear as she holds up two stuffed animals, joyfully identifying them as Ni mother and Ni father. Pleased with her progress, he tells her he needs to use the restroom for a moment. As he walks down the hall, he pauses, overhearing voices from behind a large door discussing matters of the territory. The conversation solidifies his resolve. He must find a way to make their parents see Karen properly. Behind that door, his father dismisses the idea of interacting with the children, calling it a pain he won't deal with. His mother questions why they were even outside their rooms. Uninterested, the father instructs the butler, Suaz, to handle it, confident he'll do a splendid job. She elaborates on her disdain, complaining that children are annoying, always screaming, and she doesn't want them dirtying her clothes with their drool. She acknowledges that Cyril, or Zex, wanted to see them, but declares she is simply telling him to ignore it. Standing frozen in the hallway, he hears his mother's final, dismissive words echo from the room. "Just feed them some story and deal with it yourself." The coldness of her rejection washes over him. He returns to Karen's room, his heart heavy. She is still happily playing, calling out Ni mother-father. When she spots him, she excitedly asks for a book. Gently, he corrects her, reminding her that he is just her brother, Ni. He agrees, and they sit together, opening the book. As they read, he reflects on his role. He may only be her older brother, but he resolves to do his best to love her as much as any normal parent would. This commitment is shown in their daily life. They sleep soundly together, he helps her dress in the morning, and they share meals side by side. Their bond grows stronger each day. While walking through the garden, Karen's eyes light up as she spots a glowing butterfly. "Pretty," she exclaims, asking what it is. He explains that it's a magic light butterfly, drawn to the garden because the gardener tends to the flowers so well. She looks on with wide-eyed curiosity as her brother, Cyril, points towards the estate's gardener, tending to the flowers. The gardener, surprised by their presence, looks up at the young master. With a bright, genuine smile, Karen thanks the gardener, who is visibly touched by her kindness. Cyril watches them, a wave of relief washing over him. He believes that with so much affection in her heart, she is surely no longer fated to die. For now, she is just a kind and good child. His momentary peace shatters as a grim vision from the game flashes in his mind. Karen, lifeless and bloodied. He cannot let his guard down. She is only 2 years old, and he knows her personality could still change drastically. The chilling similarity of this world to the game convinces him that it might force her down that same tragic path. His dark thoughts are interrupted by Karen's cheerful call of Ni. She stands among the flowers, surrounded by butterflies she calls her friends. Seeing her innocent joy, his resolve hardens into a silent vow. He will do anything to protect his cute little sister. He shows her a butterfly resting on his finger, and she asks if he likes them too. As she marvels at the delicate creature, Cyril understands what he must do. To change the future, he needs to become stronger. Later, in the quiet of his own room, Cyril sits up in bed, his expression set with determination. A plan is forming. He begins a secret training regimen at dawn. Starting with running and calisthenics, he counts out his stretches. He recalls hearing that it's not good for children to build muscle, but dismisses the concern. He resolves to train in a way that suits his young body and, crucially, to learn how to fight. After his physical exercises, his quest for strength leads him to another part of the estate. He cautiously peeks into the bustling kitchen, where the staff are hard at work. He watches as the chef, a man with distinct red hair and eyes, ignites an oven with a cry of fireball. The sight confirms Cyril's suspicion. Magic exists here, just like in the game. He realizes that magical attributes are reflected in physical traits. With this new knowledge, he decides he will practice magic. Just then, the chef spots him, asking what the young master is doing in his kitchen. Startled, he meekly requests some water. The chef relays the simple request to another kitchen worker, who acknowledges it. Cyril stands there, a small, uncertain figure in the large, busy room. He watches the kitchen staff from a distance. The chef remarks on the pity of a noble being colorless, while a maid effortlessly conjures a ball of water. Cyril understands the principle. In this world, everyone is born with mana and an attribute, which allows them to materialize it into magic. His own white hair is a sign of having no attribute, making him one of the few who cannot create in this way. The maid's blue hair and eyes, by contrast, mark her as a water magic user. As she hands a book to the chef, the maid continues the conversation, noting that spells are inherently colorless. They agree it's bad for the house to have a colorless air, expressing their belief that the young lady, Karen, with her blonde hair, will surely inherit the family's light magic instead. The maid smiles to herself, thinking that if Karen masters light magic like the saint, the master and mistress will be delighted. She finds it baffling that the parents treat Karen so coldly when she is so important to the family's future. He overhears more gossip from other servants hiding just around a corner. They dismiss him as the colorless brother, noting that while Karen has been treated better lately, the same can't be said for him. They look forward to bragging about serving Karen if she masters light magic. As he walks away, Cyril understands this is how the world sees the colorless, as failures from the moment they are born. Later, he finds Karen sleeping fitfully in her bed. He thinks to himself that not having an attribute doesn't mean she is useless. She stirs, her eyes welling with tears. He gently suggests that she take a nap, and she meekly agrees. After tucking her in, he quietly closes the door to her room, leaving her to rest. His training resumes in the woods. Out of breath, he focuses on his current goal, mastering physical boost, a technique that strengthens the body by channeling mana through it. He knows this is the right path for now. Physical boost is something everyone can use, even those without an attribute, a fact he recalls from a game. But since the inherent magic of the attributeless has yet to be discovered, he still cannot use conventional magic. He braces himself, attempting to channel his mana. The attempt backfires violently. He cries out as a dark, viscous substance erupts from his hand, splattering across his arm. He realizes with a grimace that this is the consequence of even a slight mistake in the output. It is theorized that anyone can use this technique, but the risks are severe. He looks down at his hand, dripping with a dark, viscous substance. He must have made a mistake while strengthening the defense around his head, resulting in a grotesque backlash. It's a technique no sane person would ever use. Despite the injury, he clenches his fist tightly. This is his only choice. He believes it's the only way he can protect Karen. As he steels his resolve, Karen stirs in her large, ornate bedroom. Sitting up in bed, she looks around the empty room and calls out for her brother, wondering where he could be. Her search leads her to the doorway, where she finds him. With a cry of relief, she rushes forward and wraps her arms around him in a tight embrace. He seems startled, apologizing for her having woken up. Her relief quickly turns to concern as she notices his injured hand. "Aniray, your hand," she says, her voice filled with worry. He tries to brush it off, telling her it's nothing and that he was just practicing magic. The sight is too much for her. Tears stream down her face as she lets out a frightened cry. He quickly apologizes for scaring her and wraps his hand in a piece of cloth, hiding the gruesome injury from her view. Seeing how terrified she is, he realizes he must be more careful. He resolves to make sure Karen doesn't find him when he's practicing magic again. To soothe her, he asks if she would like him to read her a book. The offer works. Soon, they're sitting together as he reads from a large storybook, recounting a tale of the elder of the forest who required 3 things to grant a wish. As he reads, his mind drifts. He wonders how the protagonist in the story can be so effective. He'd assumed it was because the protagonist was a reincarnator with special knowledge, but then he is a reincarnator too. Why is there such a difference in what they know? His pause confuses Karen, who calls out his name. Her voice pulls him from his thoughts. She looks up at his shadowed face, calling his name once more as a startling realization begins to form in his mind. In that case, he is jolted from his thoughts by Karen's voice calling his name. She apologizes for interrupting and asks where they left off in the story. From that day forward, he began practicing his magic in secret, away from Karen's sight, leaving her to wake up alone in her large bed. He dedicated himself to his studies, while she could only watch from a distance. Even their time reading together felt different, with a new tension hanging in the air. The separation weighed on them both. He would often wake in the night, restless, just as she sat awake in her own bed, clutching a toy for comfort. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Karen gets out of bed. She searches the empty halls and even looks outside, calling for her brother, but he is nowhere to be found. Her search takes her outside, where she finds the estate's gardener. He greets her formally, but she pays him little mind, still focused on finding her brother. The gardener expresses concern, telling her she shouldn't be wandering alone and offering to walk her back. When Karen asks again for her brother, the man replies that he has not seen Zex. With no leads, she returns to her room, sitting alone on the rug, a profound sense of loneliness washing over her. Meanwhile, in the woods beyond the mansion, Cyril is deep in his training. He focuses his mana, successfully using physical enhancement to crush a piece of wood in his bare hand. He assesses his progress, realizing he can now double his strength with mana control. He considers pushing further, perhaps enough to crush stone, but as he prepares to continue, he freezes. Karen is standing just a short distance away, and he calls out her name in alarm. He turns to face Karen, his expression filled with alarm. He asks her when she arrived and how long she had been watching. Her response is a single, quiet word: hate. Her head remains bowed as she repeats the word, adding another: magic. She hates magic. As she looks up, her face is streaked with tears. She begins to speak again, her voice trembling, and the sight of her distress strikes Cyril with sudden, sharp regret. With a desperate cry, she clarifies her fear, She wants her brother to stay with her. The weight of his actions crashes down on him. He berates himself, realizing that in his effort to protect her, he has only caused her pain. He had convinced himself his secret training was for her sake, but the result is the very thing he sought to prevent. Karen's tears. He drops to his knees and pulls her into a tight embrace, offering a sincere apology. He admits it may sound like an excuse, but he assures her that he loves her more than anything and that will never change. Wiping away a tear, she asks if he truly means it, and he promises her that he does. His words wash away her fears, and a radiant, relieved smile spreads across her face. Moments later, they walk hand in hand towards the manor. Karen calls out to him, wanting to talk more. He asks if she is certain about this, reminding her that magic can be scary and could lead to him getting hurt. She stands firm, declaring that she is sure because she will be with him. She vehemently denies it, puffing her cheeks and stating that she hates the idea of him getting hurt. Cyril finally understands. Her tears weren't from fear of magic itself, but from fear for his safety. When he asks again about magic, she declares she will love it if it means he will stay with her. Moved by her words, he decides to teach her, and she eagerly accepts, calling him Aniray sensei. He begins her training with the fundamentals of ball magic, explaining that her attribute is fire. Karen, her face a mask of concentration, agrees to the lesson. Her blonde hair and red eyes signify that she possesses two attributes, light and fire. He recalls the complexities of light magic from his past life's knowledge. It is a rare power, and merely possessing the aptitude is insufficient to wield it. A vague rumor suggested the true requirement was a deep sense of compassion for another. He finds the condition frustratingly imprecise. In the original story, Karen was never able to use her light magic, the power of the saint, despite having the potential. As he gently pats her head, praising her efforts, Karen beams with a happy giggle. A thought strikes him. If compassion is truly the key, then Karen, in her current state, should have no trouble using light magic. This realization brings a new worry. If she masters light magic, she could become a target for the royal family and other powerful entities. He is determined not to put her in danger. His thoughts are interrupted when Karen proudly presents two small fireballs she has just conjured. Watching her, he questions his own ability to protect her as she grows stronger. The years pass. Though the future remained uncertain, both he and Karen grew well. Little by little, as they studied and trained together, he began to feel a sense of hope. But then, a new figure entered their lives. A maid, with a formal and unreadable expression, offered a polite greeting. She formally introduces herself as Cheyenne Chroma, announcing that she will be their caretaker. As Karen clings to him, Cyril's mind cuts through the pleasantries with a single, chilling realization. This woman is a spy. In a grand, high-ceilinged room, a woman with long dark hair informs Cheyenne that she has received her first job. The assignment, she explains, comes directly from the Holy Royal Family. Handing over a glowing document, the woman commands Cheyenne to demonstrate her dedication, stressing the honor of serving them. Following her new assignment, Cheyenne stands before Cyril and Karen. As Karen embraces her brother, Cheyenne introduces herself, stating that she will be taking care of the two of them from now on. Cyril offers a polite greeting in return. She glances around, noting that the room feels a little warm. With a swift, sliding motion, she moves to open a window, her expression remaining placid and professional. In the next moment, her foot catches, and she pitches forward, landing hard on the floor with a loud splat. She pauses on the ground, a flicker of irritation crossing her face. Having recovered, she closes the door to the children's room. With a small scrape now visible on her cheek, she informs them that she will be waiting in the hallway should they need anything. As the door clicks shut, Cyril holds his sister and clarifies his objective in his mind. His target is Caroline Flammarill UI, Seri Fornata. He understands his mission is to observe her, as she possesses the potential to wield light magic. He must report back to the palace the very instant he witnesses any sign of it. Unaware, Karen stands peacefully, surrounded by a faint, ethereal glow. Outside in the corridor, Cheyenne waits patiently by the door, her expression thoughtful as she stands guard. Sometime later, the door opens and Cyril appears with Karen. He explains to Cheyenne that his sister needs to use the bathroom. Cheyenne bows, accepting the request. When Cyril tells her she doesn't need to come with them, she insists that it is her job. As they walk, she suggests to Karen that she should address Cyril as Oni-sama. Instead, Karen turns to her brother with a bright smile, calling out Ni and asking him to look at her. She looks up at her brother, a slight blush on her cheeks as he asks her to call him Oni-sama. Cyril, meanwhile, decides it is time to begin her formal education as a proper lady. In response, she giggles and embraces him warmly. Watching from a distance, Cheyenne observes their affectionate display, noting how unusual it is for noble siblings to be so close. She considers this a convenient development, as it will allow her to keep an eye on both children simultaneously. Later, standing outside amongst the trees, Cyril extends a hand. With a quiet utterance of disguise, he conjures a small, glowing familiar, sending it fluttering into the air to observe Cheyenne from a distance. He returns inside, his arms crossed as he thoughtfully gazes out the window. Cheyenne's voice interrupts his thoughts, announcing that the afternoon tea, complete with rose cookies, has been prepared. As they sit for tea, another maid with distinctive animal ears nervously pours a cup for Karen, spilling it in the process. Karen, unfazed, asks if the flowers are from the estate's garden. Cheyenne, ever the professional, quietly corrects the other maid's grammar. Cyril then asks Cheyenne to let him pour his own tea, but she firmly refuses, insisting it is her duty. She then proceeds to pour a cup for herself, deliberately spilling it just as the other maid had. Cyril watches this display, making a mental note to speak with the chef later. After her feigned clumsiness, she places a perfectly prepared cup of tea before Cyril without spilling a single drop. Later, she wheels a cart of clean tableware into the kitchen area, determined to ensure the staff accepts her as Lady Caroline's new maid. The gardener, seeing her work, asks if she washed the items herself, and upon her confirmation, he expresses his approval. The kitchen maid approaches, questioning Cheyenne's motives. She points out that the air is colorless and the family is destined for ruin, suggesting Cheyenne must be a weirdo to willingly work here. Cheyenne calmly replies that she was hired through a referral and that her identity is simply that of a maid. Internally, however, she reflects on the true reason for her presence. The younger sister, with her golden hair and light attribute, represents a glimmer of hope for the family's future. She works diligently at the sink, washing dishes, while two other kitchen staff chat nearby. The younger maid remarks on how innocently attached Karen is to her brother, despite his lack of color, and notes her kindness to the servants. The older maid agrees, expressing her excitement to watch the young lady grow up. As she continues scrubbing, Cheyenne relays a message from Karen, who had asked if the rose jam was made from the garden's roses. The kitchen maids are thrilled by the young lady's interest. One suggests they should try to get on her good side, perhaps by serving sugar-coated roses next, musing that she could be the next saintess. The other cautions against overdoing it, fearing the young master's disapproval. Throughout their chatter, Cheyenne remains impassive. Having finished the last of the dishes, she stands beside the sink, a pile of shattered plates on the floor beside her. The kitchen maid approaches, offering to put the remaining dishes away. She simply acknowledges that Cheyenne has completed her task. Later, a gentle knock sounds on a door. A voice from the hallway announces that dinner is ready. At the dinner table, Karen excitedly calls for her brother. As Cheyenne moves to assist the young lady with her napkin, Cyril intervenes, telling the maid to let him handle it. Karen, however, firmly refuses his help, declaring she can manage on her own. Seeing this, Cheyenne then offers to help Karen eat her meal. She proudly repeats her declaration, insisting she can eat by herself. Cyril smiles, praising her for being so amazing. As Karen beams with a cheerful, "Yeah," Cheyenne quietly corrects her to the more formal "yes," her expression unreadable. Later that evening, Cheyenne enters Karen's bedroom, holding a nightgown. She tells the young lady, who is running toward her bed, that it is time to change. Before she can assist, Cyril appears with Karen clinging to his side. He tells Cheyenne that he will handle changing his sister's clothes. When a maid protests that it is her duty, he smiles and insists, explaining that he enjoys taking care of Karen. With a slight hesitation, Cheyenne concedes. Relieved of her duties for the night, she bids both Zex and Caroline good night before closing the door behind her. Her expression turns serious as she descends the stairs. As she walks through the servants' quarters, another maid stops her with a question, wondering aloud how long the new maid assigned to the young master is expected to last this time. She paused at the door, her hand on the handle, listening to the voices from within. They spoke of the first maid, remarking on the awful circumstances of her departure. One voice noted that the maid viewed the colorless as subhuman and couldn't stand it, resigning quickly. Inside, two other maids sat on their beds, gossiping. One found the young master creepy, recalling how he suddenly began speaking like an adult at just 1 year old and started yelling at the servants, which made the next maid quit immediately. The other maid wondered aloud if he was possessed, concluding it would be better if they were kept far away from the young lady. Cheyenne entered the room, startling them. She calmly asked if they were done for the day. One of the maids turned to her, complaining that the master and madam don't care about the children and that their efforts are wasted because the moment anyone tries to interact with the young lady, the young master stops them. She walked past them without a word. As she did, one of the maids spoke up again, sarcastically remarking how easy it must be to be responsible for the young master. She suggested Cheyenne could just relax since he takes care of everything himself. The other chimed in, agreeing that it was unfair to the housemaids who were so busy. The taunts continued. One maid suggested that Cheyenne should come help them instead. The other added that since the young master is colorless, his future depends on how well he can color with the young lady, calling it a waste. Cheyenne remained silent for a moment before turning to leave, bidding them a simple good night and leaving the two gossips to stew in their annoyance. Later, alone in her room, she began to undress. Her thoughts drifted back to her first meeting with the young master. She realized he wasn't trying to curry favor with his sister. His eyes had been calm and collected, sizing her up to see if she would be a boon to both him and his sister. As she pulled the ribbons from her hair, her expression grew serious. Those two, they were focused. Sitting on the edge of her bed in her nightgown, she steeled her resolve. She couldn't mix her personal feelings with her work. Her mission was clear. She just needed to coax Zex into letting her stay by Lady Caroline's side. Suddenly, a painful memory surfaced. A small, shadowy figure running, hounded by cruel words echoing in the dark. Disgusting child. You parasite. Nobody wants you. The memory sharpened into a moment of pure terror. Her younger self, face twisted in fear, screamed at an unseen figure. Why are you here? Don't come near me, you filth. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, explaining their family's history. He recounted how they had once lost a political conflict and were banished from the country, but the royal family extended a hand in their time of need, allowing them to thrive. But this support came at a terrible price. He loomed over her, demanding she offer everything, her eyes, ears, body, hair, and even her soul, to the royal family. He declared that even if she was useless, she could at least serve as a sacrificial pawn. The thought terrified her, yet a desperate hope flickered within. She wondered if dying for the family, for him, would finally earn her father's acceptance. The memory faded, returning Cheyenne to the present, where she stood in the children's room. Cyril, seeing her, told her not to worry about them. Cheyenne replied that it was her job, and it only made sense for her to work the hours for which she was paid. She then turned her attention to the young lady, announcing it was time to change clothes. Karen, however, clung to her brother, refusing and insisting that Aniray do it. Cheyenne calmly explained that delegating work appropriately was part of a lady's duty, questioning if Karen wanted her brother to act as a servant. He gently held his sister, telling her he was looking forward to the day she would become a splendid lady. He promised her that she would be the little sister who was the pride and joy of his life. His words struck a chord. With newfound determination, Karen clenched her small fists and declared that she would try her best. Watching from the side, Cheyenne noted her success, pleased that she would work hard at it, and try she did. Under Cheyenne's watchful eye, Karen learned proper table manners, how to curtsy, and how to carry herself with grace, gradually transforming into a young lady. Her confidence grew with each passing day. One afternoon in the garden, she playfully challenged her brother to a race to the gazebo, dashing off with a cheerful cry. Watching her run, Cyril turned to Cheyenne with a grateful expression. He thanked her for everything, admitting that her arrival was timely. Before she came, he would have had to maintain an appropriate distance from Karen, even as a sister, but now he could rely on Cheyenne, as he knew little about girls. He and his sister, Karen, prepared for a race across the lawn, with Karen insisting they start at the same time to keep it fair. Watching them from the estate's gate, Cheyenne quietly wondered if she had finally managed to win his complete trust. That thought, however, brought an unwelcome memory to the surface, her father's harsh voice echoing in her mind, calling her a useless nuisance. Despite the painful recollection, a gentle, bittersweet smile touched her lips. The feeling of being trusted felt very warm. Sometime later, as winter settled over the estate, Karen's delighted voice cut through the crisp air. She pointed excitedly towards a patch of snow where several white rabbits hopped about, calling for her brother to look at how cute they were. One of the rabbits suddenly turned hostile, its posture aggressive. Cheyenne immediately moved to shield Karen, warning her away. But the young girl showed no fear. Instead, she knelt down, extending a hand and speaking softly to the creature, assuring it that it was not scary. Her gentle approach worked. Karen cradled the now docile rabbit, marveling at how fluffy it was and pointing out that its red eyes matched her own. Cyril smiled, agreeing that they were just as beautiful as hers. Nearby, Cheyenne observed the tender moment, her expression unreadable. Later that night, she composed her regular report, noting there was no new development in the target's magic. Her mind lingered on the rabbit, which had been hostile until it was exposed to Karen's light magic. She considered mentioning it, but ultimately decided against it, judging the thought too speculative to include. The days passed, and spring arrived. While Karen counted tulips in the garden, Cyril prepared to give his sister another lesson, asking if she remembered what he had taught her the day before. She confidently affirmed that she did. He began to explain his theory on magic. While it's commonly said to be a matter of intuition, he believed that one couldn't cast spells properly without understanding the underlying principles. As Karen listened intently, Cheyenne observed the lesson from a nearby doorway. Watching him, she reflected on the situation. Zexama, being colorless, was unable to use magic himself, yet he was so passionate about teaching his sister. The only possible conclusion was that he must love Lady Caroline very much. Cheyenne watched the siblings, a thought crossing her mind. Surely the boy must be jealous of his incredibly talented sister. Her thought was interrupted by the sight of young Karen, who was straining with immense concentration, her small hands outstretched. Then, with a soft pop, a cluster of light particles materialized between her palms, glowing brightly. Karen turned to her brother, beaming with pride, but from behind a pillar, Cheyenne recognized the spell instantly. It was a light ball, a form of light magic. Her duty was clear. She had to report this immediately. Once she did, Caroline would be taken to the royal palace, and the siblings would be forced to live apart. Later, during a meal, Cyril addressed the maid directly, asking for a private conversation after Karen had gone to sleep. After ensuring the young girl was sound asleep in her bed, Cheyenne prepared to meet with the young master. He led her outside into the quiet of the estate grounds. As they walked, Cheyenne felt a strange, unsettling sensation emanating from him. Wondering what this meeting was truly about, he stopped and turned to face her, his expression serious as he posed a direct question that sent a chill down her spine. "Cheyenne, you're a spy from the palace, right?" The accusation left her stammering, her hands flying to her face as she trembled uncontrollably. Cyril took her reaction as confirmation. He then offered a deal. He would keep her secret if she kept quiet about Karen's magic, asking if she had reported it yet. Flustered, Cheyenne insisted she couldn't do that, as she had sworn loyalty to the royal family. With a sharp gesture, Cyril shattered her magical concealment, revealing her long, pointed ears. Cheyenne cried out in shock as he identified her as an elf. He then delivered his ultimatum. If she refused his request, he would expose her. He reminded her of the public's hatred for elves and wondered aloud how the royal family would react to discovering one of their supposed enemies had infiltrated their ranks as a spy. He continued his threat, his expression cold. He cared nothing for the nation. His only concern was Karen's safety. He then turned the tables on Cheyenne, reminding her that it would be her, the one who swore loyalty to the royal family, who would bring them to ruin, not him. He then formally posed his offer. Defeated, Cheyenne bowed her head in submission, agreeing to his terms as if they were in order. With her compliance secured, he issued his command. She was not to report anything about the Fornata siblings without his express permission. He promised to keep her secret as long as she upheld their contract. As he spoke, he made a gesture, and Cheyenne suddenly felt as though she were being wrapped in something unseen. Cyril confirmed the pact was sealed, promising to keep his word. Her eyes widened in disbelief at the strange sensation. She couldn't comprehend how the situation had escalated so completely. She questioned her own fear. As a trained spy, nothing was supposed to make her waver. Yet, the memory of his simple command, conceal, echoed in her mind, a power she couldn't explain. As she stood alone under the trees, her thoughts raced. The boy had used spells she had never even heard of, and his eyes held a chilling intensity. She was left with a single, unsettling question. Just who, or what, was he? In a sunlit garden, Cyril announces that it is time for magic practice. He turns to his sister, Karen, and asks if she could try using light magic for him. Karen looks up at him, hesitant, while their maid, Cheyenne, watches silently. She apologizes, explaining that she can't use light magic yet, but promises to do her best to learn one day, knowing it can heal and purify. Cyril accepts this, then turns to Cheyenne. He informs the maid that he has told Karen everything and instructs her to report any incidents and to keep the matter of light magic a secret from strangers. Karen looks on in surprise as her brother and Cheyenne come to an understanding. Her surprise quickly turns to alarm. Karen confronts Cheyenne, her voice filled with worry, reminding her that Cyril had said light magic was their secret. She repeats his warning. If other people knew, bad men would come and take her far away from him. Cheyenne's expression remains firm and unreadable. He sees her distress and asks gently, "Have I ever made a mistake, Karen?" He explains that he decided it was okay to tell Cheyenne. Looking down at the ground, Karen quietly concedes, saying it's okay. Cheyenne then speaks, her gaze steady. She declares that she has sworn she will not betray Zexama. Cyril asks if hearing the secret was painful for her. With a confident smile, he simply says, "I know." He decides it is time to tell Cheyenne his own secrets. He asks her what she has been told about those who have no attribute, the colorless. He wants to know what she's heard about them being useless because they have no inherent magic. Karen reacts with a shocked gasp. He gently tells Karen to calm down, explaining that what Cheyenne believes is just the common societal view of him. This does little to soothe Karen, who becomes flustered and angrily demands how Cheyenne could say such a thing to her brother. He reiterates that Cheyenne was only stating public opinion and tells Karen not to be mad. Biting her lip, Karen reluctantly agrees, though her expression shows she is still troubled by the memory of it happening before. He begins to explain his unique magic. While normal mages use mana to create attribute magic like fire, he uses attribute-less magic, mana in its pure, unaltered state. Cheyenne is astonished, stating she's never heard of such a thing. Cyril counters that if it doesn't exist, he'll simply invent it. Cheyenne argues that it should be impossible, as the colorless are said to have no mana within them. To prove his point, he takes Cheyenne's hands and casts a spell, simply named Joy. A warmth spreads through her, and Cheyenne looks down, flustered, as her heart begins to race. Cyril watches her reaction, asking, "So?" She stood, flustered, as Cyril explained the nature of his spell. He revealed that he had used mental magic to calm her when she was restless before. The spell he just cast was a form of mind manipulation he had devised himself. He elaborated that his mana couldn't be sent outside his body like normal magic. Instead, he had to send it directly to the target, like a satellite signal. He also warned that, depending on its use, this magic could be quite dangerous, as it was invisible to most people. He then turned to her, a smile on his face, and asked if she would keep his secret. He added that there were other forms of attributeless magic besides mental manipulation, but they would get to that later. Overcome with emotion, her face flushed, she quietly agreed to protect his confidence. The moment was interrupted by a sudden, piercing cry from Karen. With tears in her eyes, she protested loudly that she was the only one who should feel happy holding her brother's hand. As she clung to her brother's arm, Cyril gently pulled his hand away from Cheyenne. Karen, still pouting, wondered to herself what the maid had done to earn so much of her brother's trust. Cheyenne, observing the scene, simply stated that she didn't mind. Time passed, and soon Cyril was approaching his 5th birthday. He spent his days engrossed in books, learning more about the world he now inhabited. He resolved that it was time to see how the commoners lived in this world. He made plans to visit the local church and the Adventurers Guild to gather information. Looking up from his book, he asked Cheyenne if Karen had returned. The maid confirmed it would still be some time before her lecture ended. Cyril considered his next move. He wanted to go out, but knew that if he told Karen, she would insist on joining him, potentially putting her in danger. He turned to Cheyenne, a plan forming. "Listen," he began. Meanwhile, Karen, having finished her lessons, wandered the long, empty halls of the manor, calling out for her brother. Her calls led her outside, where she found Cyril sitting on the steps with Cheyenne standing watch. As Karen approached, Cheyenne turned and asked her what the matter was. But Cyril was not there. He was already in the middle of a bustling town street, surrounded by commoners, gazing up at the unfamiliar architecture of the world beyond his manor walls. He wandered through the commoner town, finding the main street merely adequate. The alleys felt unsafe, and he hesitated to enter any high-class stores, knowing he couldn't cook what he might buy. Pausing at a fruit stand, he admired the produce, but realized he had no concept of its value, making a mental note to ask Cheyenne about market prices later. He then noticed children playing freely in the square, with no parents in sight. This observation led him to conclude that the area must be safe enough for them to be left on their own. His thoughts turned to practicalities. He wanted to buy some local food on a future visit, but the question of money arose. Asking the butler would be far too suspicious. He briefly wondered if his useless father was actually working, but quickly dismissed the thought, crediting their family's fortune to the competence of their excellent butler, Suez. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Karen ran towards Cheyenne in the garden, calling out to her. The maid turned, calmly asking what the matter was. She stopped before the maid, her expression stern and demanding. With a blush of frustration on her cheeks, she asked Cheyenne directly where her brother was. In response to her question, a figure identical to Cyril appeared, sitting casually with a smile. He waved, saying he was right there. Karen, however, was not deceived. She pointed an accusing finger and shouted that he was not her Onii-sama. She elaborated with adoration, explaining that her real brother is much cooler and sparkles. Whenever she looks at him, she blushes and gets a warm, fuzzy feeling inside. She declared that the decoy was nothing like him and couldn't possibly trick her. As Cheyenne chuckled and gently reminded Karen that a lady does not point, the decoy turned to the maid and stated that he would explain. Cheyenne stepped forward to clarify the situation for Karen. She explained that the figure was a fake body, created by combining her own disguise magic with Zex's mental magic. She then requested that Karen treat the decoy as the real Cyril until he returns, to prevent any trouble. The explanation left Karen stunned and confused. With a blush still on her face, she could only manage a single, quiet question. Why? She confronts Cheyenne directly, her voice trembling with hurt. She demands to know why her brother didn't tell her anything, and why she had to learn the truth from the maid. She accuses both of them of keeping a secret from her ever since Cheyenne's arrival, while the decoy of her brother stands silently nearby. Her small hands clench the fabric of her dress, a single thought echoing in her mind. Why couldn't he confide in her? The thought spirals into a desperate plea, a fear that she is losing the only person she has. She silently begs Cheyenne not to take him away from her. Overwhelmed by this fear, her expression crumples, tears welling in her eyes as a dark miasma of distress seems to emanate from her. Seeing the young girl's pain, Cheyenne decides to be honest. She confesses that she was, at least initially, a spy sent to observe Cyril. Bound by a magical contract, she explains she cannot reveal everything, particularly information that might bring harm to the siblings. Cheyenne clarifies that Cyril's reliance on her is not out of affection, but a means to keep her under surveillance. She concludes with a simple, sincere apology. She listens, her expression softening as she processes the confession. Karen acknowledges that it's natural for Cheyenne to have acted as she did, given her position, and that admitting wrongdoing is difficult for anyone. Despite the revelation, she still believes her brother relies on Cheyenne, at least a little. Meanwhile, far from the manor, the real Cyril reflects on the situation with a wry smile. He realizes his decoy didn't fool his sister for even a moment. He laments that none of his current memories will be passed on to the clone, and that he should have been there to hear her words himself. Back at the estate, Karen has finally fallen asleep. He later discusses the decoy's failure with Cheyenne. She confirms that Karen knew it wasn't him the instant she saw it, though no one else suspected a thing. Cyril wonders if perhaps trained knights or mages might also detect the ruse. Determined, he decides they must work to improve the clone and asks for Cheyenne's assistance, to which she readily agrees. His thoughts then return to his sister's well-being. He asks Cheyenne to describe exactly how Karen reacted upon discovering his absence, urging the maid not to hold back any details. Cheyenne quietly reports that Karen waited up for his return until she finally fell asleep. Hearing this, Cyril falls into contemplation, realizing his sister may be too dependent on him. He considers that her social circle is limited to adults of lower status, which has likely skewed her understanding of relationships. It dawns on him that their parents have never arranged for her to meet other noble children. He concludes that the fault is his own, as he has deliberately limited her interactions to only those people he trusts. He stands before Karen, gesturing towards the mansion's entrance with a proud smile. He explains that he has created a body double for her as well, so she can finally join him on a trip into town. Karen, however, looks up at him with uncertainty, asking if he is sure about this. He enthusiastically presents his creation, a crude, simplistic doll-like figure that looks nothing like Karen. Both Karen and her flawed duplicate stare blankly at each other. Cyril concedes that they agree on its poor quality, admitting that something must be wrong, even though he insists he installed a perfect replica of their minds within the decoys. The two figures, real and replica, touch hands. Karen looks down at their joined fingers with a puzzled expression. The failure of the decoy prompts a new strategy. Cyril explains the technical problem to Cheyenne. The clone is merely a formless lump of his mana, intangible like light. To solve this, it needs someone to provide a cover. He asks Cheyenne if she can cast a disguise spell on them. With a calm and professional nod, she accepts the task. With the spell cast, their appearances shift. Cyril now has brown hair and glasses, while Karen's hair is also brown, and both now have green eyes. He explains to her that this disguise is necessary, so they don't stand out and so the other children in town won't recognize them. Karen, however, is simply delighted, giggling that she's happy because now they match. Now properly disguised in commoners' clothes, they walk hand in hand through the town streets. Karen hums a happy tune, singing to herself about being on a trip with just the two of them. He glances down at his beaming sister, his own face flushing with pride as he thinks about how super cute she is. A passing woman notices them, remarking aloud on what a cute pair of kids they are. Their exploration leads them through a market, where Karen points toward a small alley. There, they find a white cat, and both siblings crouch down to greet it, the cat meowing in response to their attention. Continuing through the bustling street, Karen suddenly stops, her eyes wide with astonishment. She grips Cyril's arm, captivated by the sight of several other children running and playing nearby. She tugs on his sleeve, pointing with unrestrained excitement. "Kids," she exclaims, telling him to look. She has never seen children other than themselves before. Cyril watches her, realizing with a pang that she's reacting as if she's just spotted some kind of rare animal. He watched in alarm as one of the children suddenly tripped and fell flat on his face. Beside him, Karen looked on, her expression unreadable. Before he could react, Karen rushed to the fallen boy's side, kneeling down to ask if he was all right. Her sudden appearance drew the attention of the other children, who quickly surrounded her. They peppered her with questions, asking who she was, if she had just moved to the area, and if she and Cyril were siblings. Seeing the group's curiosity, Cyril stepped forward with a friendly smile, introducing himself and confirming that they were indeed new. As he spoke, Karen turned to him, her hands clasped nervously. She quietly asked for his permission to introduce herself. Gathering her courage, she turned back to the children and, with a slight blush, timidly asked if it would be agreeable for her to play with them. Her formal request was met with some confusion. The children murmured amongst themselves, noting that she talked like a grown-up. Karen's face fell, worried she had said something strange. But one of the boys quickly dismissed the concern, declaring it was fine and enthusiastically inviting everyone to play. With that, the group began a game of rock, paper, scissors. Cyril watched from short distance, a sense of relief washing over him. He mused that while the servants back home might faint if they saw Karen interacting so freely, it was important for her to learn not to simply order people about. He hoped this experience would teach her to think for herself, to ask for things sincerely, and to take people at their word. It was a crucial step in her growth. His thoughts were interrupted when one of the children called out, asking if he was going to join them. He agreed, turned to follow the group. Unseen by the children, Cheyenne watched over them from the concealment of a nearby doorway. Later that evening, during their bath, Karen was bubbling with excitement. She recounted every detail of her day, animatedly describing what her new friends, Dan and Miria, had said and done while Cheyenne attended to them. As she chattered on, Cheyenne gently announced it was time to rinse her hair, pouring water over her head. Cyril smiled, asking his sister if she had fun. Karen beamed, happily confirming that she had. She looks up at her brother from the bath, a hopeful expression on her face, and asks if they can go play with her new friends again. He immediately agrees, and she erupts with joy, throwing her arms around him and declaring her love. Nearby, Cheyenne observes with a prim expression, noting that a lady does not hug people while unclothed. Later, while sitting with her friends, Karen listens as one girl, Miria, complains about her own brother, expressing jealousy. Another girl agrees that Karen's brother is very cool, prompting Karen to proudly declare that he is her pride and joy. Miria continues her list of grievances, stating that her brother gets angry easily, hits people, stinks, and even stole a tomato she was saving right off her plate. In the distance, her brother can be seen roughhousing with another boy. The memory fades as the children decide to play hide-and-seek, starting a game of rock, paper, scissors to determine who will be it. Cyril, going by Zex, is chosen. As he begins to count, the other children scatter in a flurry of motion, shouting for him to hide his eyes and count all the way to 100. He notices, however, that Karen has remained behind. He asks what's wrong, urging her to hurry and hide. Internally, he steels himself, thinking he must be losing since he lost the first game. His determined expression softens as he realizes why she's hesitating. Karen tugs on his shirt, calling out to him not as Zex, but as her brother. He leans down, speaking to her gently. He explains that she needs to learn to walk around town by herself, framing it as a very important experience for her future. He then asks her if she can do it. With a quiet okay, Karen runs off to hide. He watches her go, a fond smile on his face as he thinks about how she's growing up. He reflects that, given his age when he died in his past life, he feels more like a father than a brother, and he's pleased with her progress. As his count neared its end, Karen frantically searched for a hiding spot, deciding on a nearby doorway while the other children called out to her. Just as the count reached 99, a large, dark hand suddenly clamped over her mouth, stifling her surprise. The final number echoed in the alley, 100. Unaware of the sudden danger, he turned around in the empty town square and called out into the air, officially beginning the search. "Are you ready?" A glove hand clamps over a young girl's mouth, her green eyes wide with shock. In the street below, chaos erupts as men seize the children. One man grabs Karen, who struggles fiercely as he warns her to be quiet. Another man demands to know who the assailants are, while a third shouts for them to let the children go. The violent present is contrasted with a gentle memory, Cyril, kneeling before Karen, offering her a small bouquet. But the memory is shattered by the current reality, as Karen tries to shout a warning to Dan, who looks back in confusion just as a large man looms over him. The moment is titled, "A Promise Between Siblings." Elsewhere, a young boy with reddish-brown hair and glasses covers his face with his hands, as if counting for a game. A voice asks if he is ready. He stands alone in a town square, calling out into the silence. When no one responds, he playfully remarks to himself that it is almost as if they are dead. The boy stretches, realizing that of course no one would reply to such a morbid joke. He briefly considers using his detection magic, which would allow him to find everyone instantly. He sighs, deciding against it. The boy recalls the principles of the non-attribute spell he invented himself. Detection sends out waves of his mana to probe the mana of his surroundings, locating others since everyone possesses at least a small amount of it. He dismisses the thought, believing it would be childish to rely on such a method. With renewed determination, he decides he should look for them properly, using his own eyes and legs. "Let's start," he declares to himself. His search is quickly successful. He spots a group of children hiding and calls out that he's found them. They complain that he was too fast. The boy, whom they call Zex, laughs triumphantly, boasting that this is what happens when the boy once called the odd child gets serious. Despite his playful victory, a strange sense of unease begins to creep in. He mentally lists the remaining children to find: Karen, Dan, and Tara, while the others he's already found, including Miria and Dan, gather around him. The vague unease suddenly sharpens into a chilling premonition, a distinct feeling that something is terribly wrong. He instantly recognizes the surge of mana. It's the emergency signal he and Karen had agreed upon, a distress call for the unlikely event that something terrible happened. Ignoring a woman calling out to him as Zex, he stops and concentrates, casting his detection spell. He immediately finds Karen's signature down a nearby alleyway. Deciding the rooftops are faster, he enhances his body with magic and sprints across them. His detection reveals Karen, Dan, and Miria are all together, with Tara slightly further away. He also senses 3 other mana signatures he doesn't recognize accompanying them. He peers down into the alley, and his breath catches. Karen is being held by 3 large, menacing men. The sight stuns him. He knows he can't just jump in without a plan. Perched on the roof, he forces himself to calm down and think. A direct assault is risky. If he attacks, one of them might threaten a hostage before he can take them all down. Meanwhile, in the alley below, a bound and gagged Karen looks on in fear, her hands tied tightly behind her back. She frantically wonders what she can possibly do. Just as the men decide to leave, Tara suddenly appears, brandishing a stick. She shouts for them to give her brother back. Cyril watches in shock as one of the kidnappers turns, seeing her as just another target. Her reckless bravery creates the perfect opening. With all 3 kidnappers now completely focused on Tara, Cyril recognizes his chance and leaps from the rooftop. He realizes that falling with gravity alone is too slow. In midair, he compresses mana beneath his feet, creating a solid foothold from which he launches himself forward with explosive speed. He slams into the first man with a powerful strike to the face, then immediately pivots to deliver a crushing blow to the second. With 2 down, he thinks to himself, one more to go. The boy with glasses evades a clumsy swing from the kidnapper, realizing with frustration that even with his power boosted 5 times by physical enhancement, he still only has the strength of a 4-year-old. The kidnapper seizes him, and the boy worries that he's no match for an adult, regretting that he never learned any martial arts. He knows he has to hurry before the other 2 kidnappers recover. Suddenly, the man holding him is engulfed in a burst of flame. Below, Karen stands with her hands outstretched, her eyes wide with shock at the powerful magic she has just unleashed. The burning man screams in agony, thrashing wildly. The boy struggles in his grasp, yelling for him to get away as a second, uninjured kidnapper approaches from behind, his face contorted with rage. He is pulled away as the second kidnapper intervenes, callously remarking that as a final mercy, he'll put the fire out, though he can't guarantee the man's hair follicles will be safe. The first kidnapper collapses, unconscious and smoldering, as the boy cries out for his brother. The boy collapses to the ground, bleeding from a severe wound on his head. Tara and Miria rush to his side, desperately calling his name and begging him to answer. Tara, kneeling over him, panics. She doesn't know what to do. The bleeding won't stop. A terrible fear grips her. Her brother is going to die. As the remaining kidnapper turns his attention towards Karen, the injured boy uses his last bit of strength to cast a spell, shouting, "Conceal." He knows the situation is dire. Karen watches in terror as the man's hand reaches for the boy, and she whispers a plea for help. The spell takes effect. The kidnapper stops, confused by the noise, and looks down the empty alley, certain he heard a voice but seeing no one. The concealment has worked, hiding Tara and the unconscious boy on a nearby rooftop. The man then turns back to the crying Karen, taking her by the hand. But Karen ignores the man's grasp, moving instead to the injured boy's side. A gentle, sparkling light emanates from her hands as she places them over his wound, weaving a powerful healing spell. Beneath her touch, the boy's pained expression softens into peaceful unconsciousness. A moment later, the light fades. Karen announces that it's okay now. The boy sits up, touching his head in disbelief. He remarks that it doesn't hurt, though he was sure he'd been beaten to a pulp. Overcome with relief, Tara throws her arms around him, crying that she's so glad, that she was so scared he was going to die. He tells her not to declare him dead so easily. Then his eyes find Karen, and he understands. He and the other children gathered around the newcomers. One girl asked Karen if her hair was a different color, but Dan quickly chided her, explaining that golden hair is the mark of the saintess. As Cyril observed the children calling him brother, he saw Karen's downcast expression and called out her name. Their reunion complete, the sky stretched out above them as they began their journey away from the town. They walked along a quiet path, leaving the ordeal and the small settlement behind them. Suddenly, Karen's steps faltered, and she came to a stop. Cyril turned, his voice laced with concern as he called her name. She looked down, her voice trembling as she apologized for breaking her promise, admitting she had been a bad girl. In response, he gently lifted her into his arms. He carried her as she buried her face in his shoulder, pleading with him not to hate her. He immediately dismissed her fears, insisting that he was the one who should apologize for being too slow to reach her. Her eyes welled with tears as she asked if she had been helpful. It was then he noticed the raw, red mark on her hand. She explained it was just a small burn from using fire magic on the ropes. He assured her she was a huge help. He understood that her desire to save Dan was so strong it overshadowed her promise to him, and she tearfully confirmed it. He gently explained that had he forbidden her from going, Dan would not have been saved. He continued, telling her there was nothing to apologize for and that she should be proud. He called her a sister he could be proud of, certain that she would do the same for him. As close siblings, he declared, they must support each other. Her spirits lifted, she beamed and agreed, promising to help him whenever he was in trouble. He smiled, thinking to himself how well she was growing up. As the first evening star appeared in the twilight sky, he made a quiet wish that she could continue to grow into an adult without any more trouble. 1 week has passed since the attack on Karen and the other children. The aftermath was dealt with relatively smoothly. To ensure secrecy, Cyril first asked Dan and the other children to keep quiet. Because he had saved their lives, they agreed without hesitation. He then applied some pressure, warning them to never speak of Karen's ability to use light magic. Dan, however, enthusiastically declared he would tell everyone, prompting Miria to call him an idiot. Following this, he recalls the events that led them to their current predicament. It began when a man on the street, seemingly drunk, collapsed. When Cheyenne asked how they ended up here, Karen explained that as a daughter of the Fornata family, it was her noblesse oblige to understand how her people live. Cyril, however, felt it was all his fault for not being able to refuse her, lamenting that he never knew such a dangerous place existed in the city. He couldn't possibly refuse after she so earnestly declared her duty to improve the lives of their people. As they walk through the dilapidated streets, Cyril finally spots their destination ahead. There they are. They approach a figure huddled under a grimy, hooded cloak. The person's face is obscured by shadows as they demand to know what the children are looking at, warning them to get out of a place that is not for kids. Cheyenne is startled by the hostile tone, but Cyril calmly tells her to relax. He perceives that despite the harsh words, the person is merely worried for their safety. He is sure of it. His internal monologue continues, confirming that this protective nature is precisely why this man is the best person to negotiate with. He identifies him as Pobble, the representative of the Fornata slums on the edge of their territory. He steps forward, addressing the man as Pobble Dono. Acknowledging that Pobble might feel uneasy about a child approaching him like this, Cyril introduces himself formally. My name is Zex Levitt Usen Fornata. I am the son of Lord Fornata. We came here to negotiate with you. Pobble questions the idea of a negotiation. Cyril explains that kidnappers have been roaming the city lately. Though they've been captured, he can't ignore the possibility of it happening again. He introduces the 2 girls with him as his little sister Karen and their maid, Cheyenne. Pobble scoffs, asking what that has to do with him, asserting that nobles would never help them. Cyril clarifies that suspicious people often come to the slums to lay low. He wants Pobble, as the representative, to gather information on any such individuals to improve public order. Pobble interprets this as a desire to purge the slums and flatly refuses, declaring he won't help with anything that could hurt his friends. He remains silent as a large, dark beast lunged towards the children. The girl, Karen, cried out in fear, but the hooded man simply shooed the creature away. Alarmed, Cyril shouted his sister's name. She began to explain their situation, recounting how she had come to town and made her first friends, only for them to be nearly kidnapped. She told him how Cyril had saved them, but that they didn't want anyone else, not their friends, not anyone in town, to experience that same terror. With Cyril and Cheyenne standing behind her, she pleaded for the man to help her brother. She clasped her hands together tightly, vowing that she would do anything. With tears welling in her eyes, she fell to her knees before the hooded man, begging him again and again to help them. The sight stopped him cold. He couldn't comprehend what was happening. A young noble lady, on her knees, begging in the dirt of the slums. As the old man stared in disbelief, Cyril stepped forward, assuring him that he had no intention of letting the people in the slums come to any harm. He explained that they only needed information, and that his own forces would handle the rest, while also bolstering the city's guard. Karen looked up, asking if that was truly okay. He then gestured to Cheyenne, who presented a heavy pouch of money. Cyril offered a monthly payment for Pauble's services, a sum that clearly startled the old man. The offer was too good to refuse. Pauble agreed, stating that he would lend them a hand. He then clutched his head, muttering that the young man should have led with the money. As he grumbled to himself, an overjoyed Karen thanked him profusely. She took his worn hand in both of hers, a gesture that left the old man momentarily speechless. Cyril watched with a gentle smile. As the group walked away from the slums, Cheyenne voiced her concern to Cyril, questioning if they could truly trust a man like Pauble. She reflected internally that loyalty bought with money can just as easily be betrayed for it. She watched them, pondering the interaction. Despite the man's preconceived notion that all nobles were enemies, he had readily accepted the proposal. All Cyril had to do was create a convenient excuse for him to agree. Cyril, meanwhile, seemed to sense her thoughts, explaining that his magic allowed him to see emotions, which is why he was so sure of the outcome. He then turned his gaze toward Cheyenne, asking her directly, "Are you scared of me?" Before Cheyenne could answer, Karen chimed in, declaring that she wasn't scared of him at all, but that she loved him. Cyril leaned in to kiss his sister's cheek, thanking her and telling her he loved her too. The moment passed, and Cheyenne's expression remained neutral as she began to form her own answer. Her internal confession was stark and clear. She was, in fact, scared of Zex. Later, in a dark cell, Cyril confronted one of the captured kidnappers. The man, trembling in his cage, screamed for Cyril to stay away, calling him a devil. With a chilling smile, Cyril informed the prisoner that he'd investigated him. The man wasn't just a kidnapper. He was a murderer, a devil himself, who had more than earned the death penalty. Cyril then mused aloud about what experiment they should try today. He reflected internally on his magic. His mental debuffs could cause permanent harm, which was why he'd never tested them on ordinary people. But now, realizing Karen's safety wasn't guaranteed, he resolved to abandon his humanity, if necessary. He would ignore any wrongdoing to protect her future. As the man in the cage screamed in agony, Cyril decided he would have the prisoner help him with his progress. The kidnapping incident had made him keenly aware of his own lack of authority. In response, he immediately began the process of seizing control of his family. After successfully winning over some pivotal roles within the household, he gained a much better grasp of the internal politics of the Fornata territory. 3 days had passed since he'd found out about the extent of the danger. It was his 6th birthday. He stood in the library with a butler, Suez, who explained a critical law of the Holy Kingdom. 10 years after succeeding in noble position, a lord must have 2 sons. Cyril, looking up from his small stature, processed the implication that they would need to adopt someone. Gazing out a window, he realized that others must have noticed his family only consisted of him and Karen. He reflected on the nature of this world, where childbirth is lethal for mothers with high mana, a fact that led nobles to practice polygamy to ensure heirs. His thoughts were interrupted by the sight of Karen outside, waving at him with a bright, innocent smile. From his vantage point, he watched her, a silent observer. He returned the wave with a gentle smile of his own as Suez inquired if there was any news of his mother's pregnancy. Cyril's response was a simple, definitive none. Continuing the conversation, he asked when his father had become the count. Suez confirmed it was 9 years ago, which meant they had only 1 year left. Cyril voiced his concern about the family being dissolved or exiled. He questioned if adopting an unrelated child was possible, given that the Fornata family was registered as a fire bloodline, a trait he knew he carried genetically despite lacking a magic attribute. Suez explained that the law permitted adoption if there was no son, but also if the first son were to die. In such a special case, the state would overwrite the registered bloodline. The implication struck Cyril with force. This law could allow an outsider to take over their entire family. Following this revelation, Suez presented a folder, stating he had already received an adoption proposal from a baron. As Cyril took the documents, he felt a strange sense of familiarity with the idea of a family takeover. His eyes scanned the page, and his expression twisted into one of pure shock as he recognized what was written. Suez, noticing the sudden change in the boy's demeanor, leaned forward slightly and asked, "Is something wrong?" His shock was quickly replaced by a cold, determined look. He stared at the name on the paper, Orca Fargata Usand Bayakadai, and calmly instructed Suez to proceed with the adoption. The butler, unquestioning, bowed and accepted the command. He recalled the details from the game he once played. The child he was adopting, Orca, was one of the love interests. On that character's route, Orca was destined to usurp his rival family, the Fornata. This future conflict was rooted in the very structure of the Holy Kingdom, a nation that was both a constitutional monarchy and a partial theocracy. 2 main religious factions existed: One viewed the god of humans as supreme, subordinating all other gods, while the other viewed all gods as equals. The differences between these denominations had given birth to deep-seated tensions. This schism fueled the discrimination against beastmen, as the monotheistic faction promoted the idea that humans were superior. Though the current royal family belonged to the pluralistic faction, keeping the worst of the persecution in check, beastmen nobles still had to navigate a treacherous political landscape. Orca's family, the Byakurai, sensed the brewing conflict and, in an attempt to survive, offered their youngest child for adoption. And now, that child had arrived. In the garden, the butler announced that Orca-sama was here. Cyril noted the speed of the proceedings. It hadn't even been a month since he'd accepted. He instructed the butler to show their guest to the lounge, saying he would be there shortly. As the man bowed and left, Cyril turned to his sister. "Let's go, Karen." As they walked, he braced himself. He knew that in 1 year, a civil war would erupt, leaving the Baron's family, Orca's birth family, either dead or enslaved. So far, events were unfolding without deviation from the game's plot. Inside the lounge, a small voice spoke up, its owner's large, furry ears twitching slightly. "Nice to meet you," the child began. "It's an honor." The voice belonged to a child who was now counted as the lowest of the Fornata family. Sitting nervously on the sofa, the boy introduced himself. "And my name is Orca Fargata Yunabaya. I'll be in your care." Cyril stared, utterly captivated. An internal shout of adoration erupted in his mind. The boy was so unbelievably cute. He struggled to regain his composure. He knew what Orca looked like from the game, but seeing him in real life had a much greater impact. The boy's cuteness was almost frightening. Turning to him, Cyril apologized and introduced himself as Zex, the eldest son of Count Fornata, and then presented his little sister, Caroline. Karen, meanwhile, looked on blankly, wondering if she and her brother were truly monsters for having bullied such a cute kid in the original story. He tries to put the boy at ease, telling Orca they will be siblings from now on and that there's no need for formality. The young beastman, however, remains visibly frightened, stammering out their formal names as he agrees to get along. Cyril can see the fear in him. The boy apologizes, explaining that his long journey has left him exhausted. Realizing he must get along with Orca, Cyril suggests a tour of the mansion. However, the butler, Suaz, steps in, acknowledging his own lack of consideration and offering to show Orca to his room instead. As the butler leads the small boy away, Cyril offers a strained wave, realizing this will be more difficult than he anticipated. Beside him, Karen watches them go, her expression unreadable. Over the following week, Orca remains withdrawn and passive, spending most of his days shut inside his room. On the rare occasions he emerges, he is incredibly timid, startling with a frightened yelp at the mere mention of his name. Cyril contemplates his efforts over the past week, acknowledging that his attempts to make the boy feel comfortable have failed. He concludes that a change in tactics is necessary. With their future on the line, he must take a more direct approach to get closer to him. His new plan, a tea party. He declares the participants will be himself, Karen, and a very startled Orca. With Cheyenne serving them delicious tea and snacks in the beautiful garden, he is certain the conversation will flourish. The tea party commences, but the air is thick with silence. Cheyenne stands at attention while Karen sips her tea with a dark expression, and Orca simply stares into his lap, anxiously chewing his lips. Cyril is baffled by the mood. He can understand Orca's quietness, but he distinctly remembers how thrilled Karen was at the prospect of a tea party with her beloved older brother. Yet now, she glares over the rim of her teacup, her silence radiating hostility. He tries to salvage the situation, encouraging them to relax and enjoy the party he organized to deepen their bond as siblings. At Cheyenne's prompting, he tries to speak, but Karen cuts him off. She coldly states that he never said a word about this being a party to welcome their new sibling. She believed it was just for the two of them. The realization of his blunder hits Cyril hard. He offered an apology for the sudden introduction, but since they were all present, he suggested they take the opportunity to get acquainted. After all, he reasoned, they would be supporting each other as siblings from now on. Karen, however, remained unmoved by his appeal. With a cold expression, she declared that she was perfectly fine with only the two of them supporting each other. Her sharp rejection made Cyril flinch, a nervous sweat breaking out on his face. Trying to salvage the situation, he gently chided Karen, reminding her to consider Orca's feelings, alone and in an unfamiliar place. He then turned to the timid boy, attempting to reassure him that his little sister was, in fact, a very kind person. Orca could only manage a hesitant agreement. Despite the reassurance, Orca remained visibly shaken, his small hands trembling as he stared down at his teacup. His fear was well-founded. Across the table, Karen fixed him with a silent, intense glare, her eyes burning with undisguised hostility. The sheer malice in her expression caused Orca to cry out in terror, leaving Cyril caught helplessly between them. The tea party devolved into a tense, unbearable silence. While Karen calmly sipped her tea, a picture of innocence, Orca was slumped in his seat, utterly dejected. Cyril could only sweat, wondering to himself how his well-intentioned plan had gone so horribly wrong. In the dense forest, Cyril enhances his physical abilities with body reinforcement magic. Simultaneously, he casts a detection spell, sending out magical pulses to locate his targets. His spell reveals a large black serpent, which he deftly dodges as it strikes. He reflects that he is hunting these magical beasts to gain real combat experience with non-elemental magic, a process he likens to grinding in a game. His senses already lock onto the next creature 100 meters away. He takes aim, pointing his finger like a pistol. A brilliant flash of energy erupts from his fingertip as he unleashes a spell he calls gunfire, noting to himself that this is the last one. The projectile strikes its distant target, leaving a patch of scorched earth and smoldering trees. He sighs, blowing on his fingertip. The spell's efficiency is awful. Every shot burns through nearly all the mana in his body. His training concluded. He meets up with Cheyenne and tells her it's time to head back. He reflects inwardly that his poor mana control is the problem, acknowledging he still has a long way to go. Cheyenne addresses him formally as Lord Zex. His thoughts turn to the maid beside him. He recalls the magical oath he placed on her. Do not leak information about the siblings, but realizes with a start that it doesn't cover Orca. This loophole means she could pass intel to her employer, and he is unsure if this will ultimately be a good or bad thing. He continues to weigh his options, knowing he may need to rethink how he deals with Cheyenne depending on her next moves. For now, however, he decides to prioritize Karen. Cheyenne agrees, believing it's best to call for Lady Karen ahead of time. Despite his efforts, the emotional distance between the two children is vast. Karen and Orca remain back-to-back, unwilling or unable to open up to each other. This very problem is on Cheyenne's mind. As they walk, she asks for a moment of his time. She admits that she is stumped. Karen's rejection of Orca runs deeper than she had assumed, and her brother complex is even more pronounced than she'd expected. Her blunt assessment catches him by surprise. Cheyenne continues, observing that he seemed rather worked up today. The comment makes him pause, and he internally concedes that he has severely underestimated the difficulty of this situation. He reflects on Cheyenne's genuine concern. She worries this much about him, the very person who bound her with an oath spell. He asks her for any ideas on how to bridge the gap between Karen and Orca. Cheyenne suggests that if increasing their contact hasn't worked, perhaps he should start with separate, individual talks. Cyril agrees. He spends the rest of the day training, reflecting that while monster hunts are part of the academy curriculum and an easier way to get stronger, today's run is mostly for stress relief. As he looks out over the forest, he notes that sunset has already arrived. This world doesn't operate on a system of levels, but it is common knowledge that defeating magical beasts improves one's abilities. A status screen for a Temple Knight trainee displays their current statistics and skills. A magical beast is an animal that has accumulated ambient mana, evolving into something more vicious and hostile to humankind. Some say slaying one allows the victor to absorb its excess mana, but this has never been proven. Cyril unleashes a blast of dark energy at one such creature. Later, while walking with Cheyenne, she continues her advice. She points out that he has also avoided being one-on-one with Karen since Orca's arrival. Realizing she's right, he listens as she recommends he create time for just the two of them, suggesting he might then hear what's truly in her heart. He thanks her, admitting her advice helps. She, however, understands the risk. For a noble to expose the vulnerabilities of their house to a spy is a significant gamble. Following her advice, Cyril meets Karen in her room. He thanks her for coming and remarks that it's been a while. She reminds him they were given separate rooms after his 5th birthday. He recalls how she threw a fit back then, demanding a room just as large as his, but at least she was honest about it. She sits across from him, her expression serious, and immediately asks why Orca isn't with him today. The question catches him completely off guard. He suddenly bows his head low, startling her with a loud apology. He admits he hadn't realized they hadn't had time to talk alone lately, confessing that it's all his fault and that he was being stubborn for no reason. He continues his apology with his head bowed, admitting that he pushed her to befriend Orca without considering her feelings. He laments what a poor big brother he has been. Karen quickly refutes this, her voice filled with emotion as she insists he is not failing at all. He is her number one big brother. She accepts his apology and urges him to raise his head. Relieved, Cyril thanks her. She then makes a confession of her own. She was jealous. It was the same situation with Cheyenne, she explains, but she was too young to understand her feelings back then. Now, however, she does. Her words clarify everything for Cyril. Karen continues, admitting she hated seeing his attention go elsewhere. Watching him worry so much about Orca made her anxious, as if her big brother would one day become his instead. The memory surfaces of Cyril turning his back to her, making her feel as though she would be the one left behind. Hearing her fears laid bare, Cyril rises and pulls her into a tight embrace, apologizing for having made her worry so deeply. Karen looks up at him, her expression a mixture of surprise and relief. He holds her close, promising her that she is the one who is first in his heart. He acknowledges that as nobles, their obligations and connections to other people will only increase, but he vows that this one thing, her place in his heart, will never change. Pulling back just enough to meet her gaze, he reaffirms that she is his one and only treasured little sister. He knows she will feel jealous again, but he asks her to remember his promise. Touched, Karen agrees and asks that if she ever feels that way again, he hold her just like this. Her mind drifts back to that earlier time, recalling her younger self admitting her jealousy over Cheyenne, unable to comprehend the feeling then. The memory solidifies her past anxiety, Watching Cyril's attention focused on another had filled her with the fear that he would cease to be her big brother, becoming someone else's instead. She watched him turn to leave the library, a familiar pang of anxiety rising within her. "Big brother?" she called out, her voice small. But as he took a step away, a desperate thought echoed in her mind. She couldn't bear the idea of being the one left behind. Cyril apologizes for summoning Orca so suddenly, offering her a cup of tea to help her relax. The girl, shivering with her cat-like ears twitching nervously, accepts the offer. As she brings the cup to her lips, Cyril observes her intently. She gulps the tea down in one go, her cheeks flushing as a wave of warmth and relief washes over her. The effect is immediate. Her tail begins to wag with such force that it thumps against the furniture. Cyril asks if she enjoyed it, and she gives an enthusiastic yes, though he privately thinks it's still not quite right. Pleased by her reaction, he offers to pour her another cup. Orca becomes flustered, insisting that she couldn't possibly let Zek-sama serve her. Cyril simply smiles, reassuring her that it's fine since he always does it, and he's glad she likes his personal blend. He then reveals that brewing tea has been a hobby of his since his past life, mentioning that he even earned a few certifications for it. Orca is left utterly speechless by this revelation. Her shock is so great that she lurches forward onto the table, apologizing profusely for potentially belittling his interests. Cyril calmly tells her not to worry, as he isn't blaming her. Despite his reassurance, Orca's ears twitch as she thinks to herself that he is a little frightened. Still leaning over the table, she clarifies that her reaction was simply due to shock. She explains that he is nothing like the image she had in her mind of a high noble son. She elaborates on this image, describing high nobles as arrogant people who toy with others and bully those beneath them for their own amusement. Throughout her explanation, Cyril listens with a gentle smile, promising that he won't get angry, no matter what she says. His patient expression vanishes as a mortifying realization dawns on him. He recognizes her description immediately. That was exactly how he and his sister behave as characters in the game. This perception is rooted in the harsh reality of their world, where high nobles are known to treat commoners as mere tools. Those of lower status are trampled, and for the nobility, the misfortune of others is a sweet delight to be savored and crushed. Cyril recalled the events of the original story. In that timeline, he and his sister had tormented their adopted brother, Orca, treating him as nothing more than a punching bag. This torment continued until the heroine, the saint, found him. She slowly healed his wounds, both physical and emotional, eventually helping him overcome the terrifying Fornata family and taking him away. That was the full outline of Orca's story. It made perfect sense why the boy was so wary of him. Cyril realized that, in all likelihood, Orca had already been harassed by children from rival factions even back at his home, the Byakudai barony. With this understanding, Cyril addressed Orca directly, his voice earnest. He acknowledged that it might be hard to believe, but he assured the boy that the current Fornata family was on his side. He promised that he and Karen would never betray him. Orca flinched, startled by the declaration. He added a quiet hope to his promise. The words seemed to have an effect. Orca rose and tapped his way out of the room, pausing only to peek back from the hallway. Cyril offered a small, encouraging wave before his expression turned serious, contemplating what needed to be done. Outside, he was approached by the captain of the guard. The man chuckled, admitting he almost lost his temper when he saw them playing cards in broad daylight, but expressed gratitude for Cyril's leniency. He reported that ever since Cyril started observing their training, everyone had been taking it much more seriously. He replied calmly, acknowledging that he understood if they couldn't believe in him yet. He simply asked that they stay involved and keep watch, reasoning that nothing could begin if they remained ignorant of the situation. His thoughts drifted back to the conversation inside. Karen had spoken with gentle sincerity, telling Orca that while she hoped they could become a real family, he should move at his own pace. Orca had simply and quietly agreed. As he led Orca to the door, Cyril considered this a good first step. He believed that if they kept building contact and interacting with each other, Orca was bound to eventually open his heart to them. His gaze then fell upon the training guards once more. He observed their beat-up armor and swords, making a mental note that he would need to budget for replacements. He encountered Orca in the hallway, asking if the boy was heading to his history class. He gently told Orca that he could drop the formal sama suffix when addressing him. Flustered, Orca confirmed his destination, still referring to him as Zek-sama. During their lesson, the tutor posed a question about a historical figure's reforms. Karen answered promptly and correctly, listing achievements such as flood control, soil reform, and the implementation of sewer systems. When the tutor turned to Orca, however, he could only look down at his book and admit that he did not know. With a pleased grin, Karen accepted the tutor's praise for having studied so well. Her confidence only seemed to deepen Orca's own sense of failure as he looked away, ashamed. The memory of this inadequacy weighed on him. He bowed deeply to Cyril, apologizing for stopping him. With his head down, he anxiously asked if Cyril would still hire him as a personal tutor, confessing that he felt someone like him didn't deserve such an honor. Back in the classroom, the tutor pressed him further, asking for the 3 main achievements of the third Holy King. Orca stammered, managing only to recall flood control before trailing off. He immediately misinterpreted Karen's expression as judgment, turning to her and apologizing profusely. He insisted he would never speak out of turn, especially not before her. Karen, taken aback, tried to explain that wasn't what she meant at all. Elsewhere, Cyril sat at his desk, listening to a report on these events. His expression was serious as he took in the details, murmuring that he understood the situation. The tutor and the butler stood before him. With a calm smile, he thanked the woman for her report and dismissed her. As the door slammed shut, the butler acknowledged the command. The moment they were alone, his formal demeanor evaporated. He slumped forward onto the desk, groaning about how tough raising children was. Beside him, the butler could only agree. Karen let out a weary sigh. She knew she had been difficult today, but her thoughts also turned to Orca. He was just as frustrating. In his own way, he never said a word about himself. Seeking a distraction, she walked through the gardens and approached the groundskeeper, who was tending to a flower bed. She thanked him for his hard work and asked what he was planting. The gardener looked up, acknowledging Lady Karen. He explained that for now, he was just mixing fertilizer into the soil, and the planting would come after it settled. He then asked if she had a particular flower she would like. Karen paused to think. After a moment, she had an idea. Any flower would be fine, she told him, as long as it was a pale purple, the same color as her brother's eyes. The gardener chuckled warmly, observing that she truly adored Zexama. Her cheeks flushed with affection. Of course, she affirmed, he was her brother. She loved him more than anyone else in the entire world. With her request made, she turned to leave, telling the gardener she would be looking forward to the flowers and would ensure they were cared for. As she walked along the path, a faint sound caught her attention. She paused, puzzled, thinking there shouldn't be anyone over there. Peering into the bushes, she found the source of the noise. Huddled amongst the leaves, trying to make himself small, was Orca.